1X Developer Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to the 1X Developer Podcast. It's me, Collin. No Brendan today, but I do have here a special guest, Matt Watson. How's it going, Matt?
Hey, thanks for having me. You know, I'm curious, why is it the 1X Developer Podcast and not the 10X Developer Podcast?
Yeah, so it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think the idea mainly is, we want to appeal to just like average developers, and kind of get into the average developers, talk about what it is that we struggle with, what it is that we want to learn about, but also, yeah, it's kind of just funny.
Well, I think it's the 10X podcast today because I'm here, right?
Yeah, it's the 100X Developer Podcast today. So I guess, I know I hate when people ask me this question. I'm gonna go ahead and ask though, like, can you kind of give me like, what is your background? What is your story? Where'd you start? How'd you get interested in this? And
Well, so in regards to software development, when I was a little kid, my dad went to school for doing computer programming, and the school like went out of business, so he never actually got a job doing it. But I was always kind of interested in it. I grew up with computers. I was born in 1981, so I grew up with Commodore 64 and had one of the first like old laptops that had like a blue and white screen and looked like a freaking suitcase to carry around, and the keyboard popped off and that was like a portable computer. Yeah. Like, I grew up in that whole era, right? Like, and then thinking about now how far we've come from there to AI, like, man, the era that I've grown up is wild. But I grew up in that era, and I first started doing computer programming actually to play some text-based games over modems when I was like 13. So using those old computers, I played some text-based bulletin board games.
So you had the code to like make the game work?
Well, it was to play the game for me while I was asleep, right? So it's like, go north, kill the skeleton, pick up the gold, wait to rest, go north, find the next skeleton, kill this, it was like that kind of thing.
Okay. So you were writing some of the earliest bots.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, it would have been a bot. I never really thought about it being a bot, but yeah, you're right.
I mean, these weren't like online games, were they?
They were bulletin board based. So dial up, like I had like old, 14.4, 56K, this was like AOL before AOL days even.
Okay.
Long time ago. I don't know how old you are, but I'm showing my age now. I'm old.
Yeah, I was born in 94, so
okay.
Yeah, I'm a little older than people usually think I am, but yeah, I don't remember any of that stuff. My earliest games were like PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, that stuff.
Mine was in television and Atari.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting because you ask a lot of developers how they got interested in tech, and a lot of them go to video games. We've talked about that on the podcast a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of got interested when we were like getting into PC building in high school, and I mean, that was more hardware, but still just kind of like doing it. It was like, okay, so what does this piece do? What does that piece do? What is any of this that I'm doing? How does it all work? I think that was kind of the first thing that kind of got me like asking questions.
Well, I was very interested from doing the basic scripting, sort of writing a bot to play those games, but then ultimately, when I got to the end of high school, decided I wanted to do software development, and I went to a local college here called DeVry University. And then I dropped out after a year and a half. So,
right. So I don't know your whole story, but I remember like, so you did your first startup from a dorm room, right?
No, so that was the year 2003. So I was 22 years old. But the origins of that is I was actually at working at Sears selling computers, and a car dealership came in to come buy a computer. And long story short, I ended up helping that same car dealership build some software as like a little side project. It was like a Visual Basic 6 little database, like Microsoft Access database, basically to keep track of customers and do some basic stuff for the dealership. And then in 2003, a couple of years later, that same dealership introduced me to my original co-founder of that first company. And I worked at a couple other companies like professionally during that same stint. But yeah, I only had like 2 or 3 years of experience or something like that before we really started that company in 2003.
Okay. So I'm interested, have you always been like, did you always know you wanted to own a company and be a
No,
founder and all that?
no,
Okay.
no. I was just always the guy that was helpful. It's like somebody said, "Hey, could you help me with this thing? I have this little side project." I was always just the guy who said yes.
Yeah.
Even in the middle of all of that, like I said, I was doing this little side project for that dealership, and honestly, they never really paid me that much, but it was
Yeah.
how I got so much real world experience. Because when I first started doing that, I was selling computers at Sears and still going to college.
Yeah.
So that was like real world experience for me. So, and then I had a couple other people. I did some like random like freelance side projects. I just always said yes. I mean, that's the whole thing over my whole life. It's just like people ask me like, "Hey, can you help me with this thing?" And I just say yes. I don't really know where this is going to go, but I'm looking for opportunities. I'm open for opportunities because you never know where they're going to lead.
Right. Yeah. So I find it interesting, and maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of the discussion, but like I always find it interesting. Like, I mean, so myself and a lot of developers, we do side projects, we work with people, and then we never really get like a lot of financial gain out of it, or a lot of most of us work in an office at a regular job, and I always find that interesting. I read a while back, Masters of Doom. It's about the guys who made the Doom video game. I'm sure you probably, yeah.
I
And
played it
so,
when it came out. I'm that old.
yeah. So part of the things that it gets into is how John Romero apparently from an early age was like, I'm going to be rich and famous. Like he would like write in his journal and stuff like, I'm the best programmer in the world and I'm going to be famous for it. And so it's interesting when you hear guys that are like, yeah, I mean, I just kind of did this thing, and then I don't know, things happen.
I mean,
So,
I came from very humble beginnings. I was born in a trailer park, the product of a one night stand. I did not start thinking I was going to conquer the world and be the best anything in the world, right? I've just always been a humble guy trying to help people do things. And to your point, like I think a lot of people do different side projects or different startup ideas, and I guess I got a little lucky with mine, but it started out that the guy that originally needed the help, he came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going around, I'm taking pictures of cars. I need to upload them to the internet. It's a pain in the neck. I just need to like upload these files somehow to like cars.com and autotrader.com. I need to upload the pricing and like vehicle descriptions, and that's it. Is there some way you can do that?" And as you think about that, you're probably like, that sounds pretty easy to do.
well, today, yeah.
Sounds pretty. And this was 2003. And I was like, sure, I can FTP some files. Like that sounds pretty easy. And what was great is he already had customers. And so what really worked is I was able to build a really fantastic product, right? Like he had no idea how to build software. He had no idea how to build a business. He wasn't a business person. He didn't know how to do any of this stuff. Neither did I. But I was really, really good at building products, not just writing code, but building products. There's a very big difference. And most software developers are usually really good at the code part of it, but not really good at the product part of it. And that was what I think set me apart, as I've always been really good at the product side of things.
So where do you think that comes from? Your focus on like making good products?
I think it started from my first job. The first job I ever had was working at a type of ticket broker. So think of StubHub, but this is old days, and these kinds of ticket brokers still exist, right? Where they sell concert tickets and sport tickets and whatever. So I started working there around 2001, 2002 is when I worked there. And I was writing bots to buy tickets from Ticketmaster. We also built a point of sale system and websites for our ticket broker that I worked for, and then we sold them to other ticket brokers. But what made my story unique is I was basically the lead developer. I was 19 years old when I started this job. I was the main support person. I was the main developer. I traveled all over the country installing the software. I was helping build and write the software while on a plane, going from here to there, doing all the things. I was not hiding in a cubicle somewhere writing code. I was talking to customers every day. Like I was the guy who said, "Hey, we need to add this feature. We need to do this thing. Can you do this?" And I'm literally writing it and pushing the code that day. and it was a Visual Basic 6 app. And I credit a lot of that to, I think, what drove part of my career is like, I wasn't hiding in a cubicle somewhere writing code. Like I had to talk to the customers every single day from the very beginning of my career. And I think that's the part of it that most developers miss. They never talk to the users. They never talk to the customers. And so they're always thinking about the code and not thinking about the users.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, like, just from my own experience, a lot of the time, I think what's different about your story is that you were kind of forced to talk to the customers, right?
At 19.
Because I would have, yeah, I think most of us have the opportunity to, but then it's like, I don't really
You
want
avoid
to.
them.
Yeah, because it's like I kind of just want to, like, be over here on my computer, and that's what I like to do,
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, like, you were probably facing some like imposter syndrome and stuff, right? You were thinking like, man, this is crazy, right?
I think I was having the best time of my life and having fun, honestly. I mean, I was working in a fun industry. I got to travel all over the place. I mean, at 19 years old, I got to go to Toronto to go to this brokerage there. And they're like, hey, the Toronto Maple Leafs play tonight. Do you want to go to the Maple Leafs game? Hell yeah, that sounds like fun. But on the way, let's go to downtown Toronto and check out the subways and have a drink. And I've never seen hookers before. Can I try and take a picture with one of those? Like, that would be funny. Like, I'm 19 in a country where all these things are illegal and things I've never seen before. I'm 19 years old, out of the United States for the first time in my life. And then the next day, he's like, well, hey, WrestleMania's tonight. You want to go see Hulk Hogan? I'm like, why not? At 19, this is what I was doing at 19 while working, all in between this. Like, the experiences I got to have were great. And there was more and more of that. Like, I traveled around to ticket brokers every month. And so I got to do all sorts of fun stuff. I got to travel all over the United States. And part of it was crazy. Like, my boss would come in at 9 a.m. and be like, hey, one of our customers called. They're really furious. I need you on a plane to Chicago in 2 hours. You can come home tonight. That's fine. But I need you in Chicago now. And I would literally be like, okay, yes, sir. And go to Chicago. But I traveled all over the place and I had a great time and I was just having fun. Like, I was building stuff, love to build stuff, love to talk to people. I was having a great time and I was getting to see the world.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude.
And most people don't, right? They're hiding in a cubicle somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most people don't go to Toronto and watch WrestleMania and fly to Chicago on a minute's notice.
No.
I guess I should have asked earlier. Have you always been like in the KC area?
I was born in Oklahoma, but I've lived in Kansas City for over 35 years.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so you were like a small town guy kind of growing up?
Yeah. We're in flyover country, as they call it.
Right, yeah. Well, so tell me about Full Scale.
Yeah, so Full Scale actually started as an accidental business. So over my career now, I've started 3 SaaS companies. I've started and exited 3 different SaaS companies. And the second one was a company called Stackify. And then in the middle of that, I needed to hire more developers. There was no way I was going to be able to afford to hire 10 developers in Kansas City. And recently, I was really struggling with recruiters recruiting away our developers. I lost our CTO to Microsoft. I lost our other best developer to AWS. And then like a third person. And was really struggling with just retaining people. The job market, was insane. And a friend of mine had some employees in the Philippines doing stuff for his ticket brokerage, ironically enough. And so I just said, hey, you know what? Let's try and hire a few people there. He had a couple PHP developers at the time there and set up like a little co-working space. And we set it up as a partnership. So it was like a 50-50 little partnership. It's like, hey, Stackify can be the customer of this thing. And maybe we know some other people that could leverage this. Like, if this works for me, it'll probably work for some of my friends. And over the next 18 months, we hired 100 people, 100 software developers or so in the Philippines. And so it was like an accidental business that was born out of my own necessity. Like, I just needed a way to affordably hire developers as a, fairly lightly funded startup who was trying to compete, by the way, with New Relic and Datadog and some of these kinds of companies that a lot of listeners have probably heard of. But
yeah, so I'm curious, like, you've heard probably that axiom of like solving your own problem, right? Like, just when people say like, I want to do a startup, I don't have an idea, and people say like, well, just solve your own problem. So that's kind of what Full Scale was, right?
It was, and actually, so all of my companies have been that way. So the original company, the guy was taking pictures of cars. He's like, I need an easier way to upload this information to the internet. Can you help me? Like, he had the problem. Like, he was the Winklevosses and I was the Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Back to the Facebook analogy, right? And then for my second company, I was trying to solve my own problems. I'm like, how do developers have better access to production, to do troubleshooting and monitoring? Like, I can't give all my developers production access to log into all the servers. Like, there's got to be a way for them to get. So I was trying to solve my own problem. And Full Scale was the same thing. And I also host a podcast called The Startup Hustle, and I interview other entrepreneurs. And all of the best businesses are the exact same way. They're like, I have a problem. I looked around the market. I couldn't find anybody who's solving this problem. Am I crazy enough to go solve this problem myself? And actually, for my very first, that company I worked at, that ticket brokerage, we built this point of sale system. I'll give you a little side story about that. That was the same story. Part of what he figured out, because back then all the tickets were physical. Today everything is like mobile ticketing. But back then, he would send UPS and FedEx every single day, potentially like dozens of them, like sending out the tickets. Well, guess what? UPS and FedEx doesn't deliver everything on time. And if they don't deliver everything on time, you're supposed to get your money back. So we built software to self-audit all the UPS and the FedEx bills. He ended up spinning that functionality out into another company called Veriship, which became like one of the industry leaders in auditing UPS and FedEx bills. And I think he sold that company like 3 or 4 years ago for like $100 million or something like that.
Yeah.
And we originally built like the first version of that almost 20 years ago now. But again, it was solving his own problem. But to your point, the problem most people have is they don't have enough experience in a specific industry to see the problems.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'd say that like one of the big challenges I've had is like, just as like a normal developer, I go to a business and I have to like relearn this whole industry.
Yeah.
Right. Because most developers, they don't always stay like just in one vertical their whole career. And even if they do, it's like a different story everywhere you go. So
but you know what the problem is, right? The problem is developers spend too much time talking and looking at the code and not enough time talking to the users, the customers, the product, the industry, and understanding the industry and the product and all that they live and work in, right? If all you're doing is staring at the code all day, you never understand and learn the industry to that level.
Right. Yeah. And that's how you identify those problems, right?
Yeah. You've got to be an expert in the industry.
I'm curious, what do you think are like some of the big problems in the future? Like, I think a lot of people, they hear stories like ticketing, right? Like, okay, Ticketmaster kind of like has it covered, right? Like, do you think there's any big like, what am I trying to say? Sometimes it seems like all the low-hanging fruit has kind of been grabbed by everybody, right?
I think so, but I think there's two sides to that. You have some types of markets where it's not a winner take all, right? Think about owning, I know this isn't an exact analogy, but owning a plumbing company. There's not one plumbing company in the world. There's always going to be like thousands of them, right? And so there are a lot of product categories that are that way. It's not a winner take all market. It's not like you're choosing Slack or Microsoft Teams or Zoho or Google Chat, and pretty much the other part of the market is fighting for 1%, right? There are lots of markets where it's not a winner take all market, right? But there are some that it's winner take all, and it would be very difficult to unseat those top 2 or 3 vendors. And if you're going to, you still can, but you've got to focus on a really niche part of the market, right? Like you could build a competitor to Slack, but be like, well, it's designed for this exact kind of company, this exact industry with these exact problems that Slack doesn't solve. And you know what? I've decided I'm not going to try and build something that everybody wants. I'm going to build something and build it only for this unique set of people, which nobody wants to do. Everybody wants to build it for everybody. You got to be very niche specific, and then eventually it can grow and do other, niches. But that's the thing is people, we always want to build something. This is like an entrepreneur disease, is it's hard to say no. You're like, well, I want to build something everybody needs. But it's actually counterintuitive. You want to build something that only like a very few specific people need, and they know that they need it, and they will pay more money for it because it solves their problem in a unique way that it doesn't solve for everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Do you think like passion plays a role in that? Like, do you you think that you're like passionate about the problems that you've been trying to solve, or is it more like this is the task that's in front of me, I'm just gonna go after it?
I mean, in regards to being an entrepreneur, I think that's 100% the case. Because being an entrepreneur is very different than like I have a job and I'm a software developer. Like being an entrepreneur, it's like you're dealing with all sorts of problems, and every day you not every day, but probably at least once a week, you wake up and question your reality of like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I taking all of this stress, all of this risk? And you're dealing with new problems on a daily, weekly basis that you never planned for, and all the things. Like and the point is, like, if you don't have the passion to do what you're doing, you're not going to do it. Like, you're not going to stick through it. Like, you're not going to wake up every day and get punched in the face and deal with all of these problems. Like, you're not going to succeed. Like, you have to be passionate about whatever it is you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Especially to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, so I think it's true for being good at your job, like any kind of job too, right? Like even just being a software developer, like I'm good at my job. I love my job. Like you should be passionate about it, but it's like 1,000 times more important as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to switch gears, get into like something random here. Like, you mentioned AI a little bit earlier. What do you have like a take on the AI hype? It seems like right now, like as a developer, you can either be, yeah, AI is changing the world and fire all your developers. It doesn't, we got robots doing it. And then there's another camp that's like, yeah, it's a bunch of hoo-ha, whatever.
Well, let me ask you this. What percentage of your time a day do you spend writing code?
Actually, like locked in writing is pretty low, probably like 20%, I think.
Okay. So how many lines of code do you write a day?
It depends a lot, but I don't know. Actually, maybe like 100. It depends, because like
it's not 100.
It could be 100.
That's not 100.
Yeah.
Not unless it's auto-generated code.
Well, that's what I was
ORM.
gonna say. That's what I was gonna say is like, you install like npm packages and you just run one thing and you've got thousands.
Not counting that.
Yeah, that doesn't count. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking like real, like I'm writing a new function, I'm gonna put this out, like, yeah, it's probably like 20.
Yeah. So this is the reality part of it for me, from my perspective. Okay. You just said I spend 20% of my time writing code, and most developers write. I heard this study before, and nobody knows what the real number was. That the average developer wrote 6 lines of code a day, which sounds crazy. If you go ask AI today, like how many lines of code does a software developer write a day? It'll tell you 10 to 100. And yeah, it's probably 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It's not a lot. Like we spend all day writing a method or two, fixing a bug, changing a few lines of code. Yeah, it's different if you're using like some ORM or a whole bunch of HTML or CSS or a bunch of crap that is a little different. But like really logic, like hard, complicated code, it's not a lot of lines of code a day. So here's my point. If AI currently makes us like 50% more productive, you go from writing 20 lines of code to 30. Like it's only 20% of your job to write code, right? And so the other 80% of your job, how is AI impacting the other 80% of your job is part of the question.
Yeah. Well, in something I think a lot about is like, most of my day is not even really like in the code, right? Like maybe it is, but it's like I'm thinking about, okay, why is this bug happening? What actions are happening in what sequence to make this bug happen? And how do I solve this in the most like reasonable way? And I feel like that's something that, I mean, AI could help me, I guess, like if I'm chatting with it, but that's really not like a lines of code type of problem.
Well, a lot of software development time is spent in planning, requirements, architecture, testing, debugging, troubleshooting, documentation, both reading it, writing it, like all this different stuff, right? There's all these different components. Could AI help in all of those? Probably, maybe in different ways, but I don't think it necessarily replaces any of them unless it takes away some of the thinking and you're like, you become the sort of slave to the AI where it's like, okay, you're going to architect it this way, go create this exact same thing. And by the way, I already did it for you. Just make sure it works.
Yeah. No, see, and that would be terrible because
and that job would suck.
Yeah. Well, think about like if you had this thing architecting all this stuff that you don't even understand it, right? So you've got this whole thing that you built that you don't even know what is, and then then somebody comes in and is like, oh, we need to redo everything. I guess you got to hope that AI model knows how to redesign it again.
You just hit for me on the biggest problem, and somebody wrote a great LinkedIn post about this one day. They're like, I could spend an hour writing 20 lines of code or whatever to create this method, and I understand how it works, and I know how to troubleshoot it, I know how to debug it. Or I could spend 15 minutes getting AI to write code that actually does this thing. And then do I spend another hour or two debugging it because it doesn't work quite right, trying to fix it and make it do it?
Yeah.
And I don't understand the code that it created because I didn't write the code, so I don't quite understand why it wrote the code this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that becomes part of the challenge here of like, if you create the code and you understand the logic, it's much easier for you to debug it and troubleshoot it. And you and I both know the least favorite thing of any developer to do is to debug somebody else's code.
Yeah.
And if we're saying our job is basically to debug AI built code all the time, like we're going to have to really agree on what that code looks like. And it is optimized for being, readability will be the number one priority. Like readability of the code will have to be more important than anything else.
Yeah. So it sounds like I think we're pretty in agreement of we're not in either one of those AI camps. We're somewhere in the middle.
I think we're somewhere in the middle. And I mean, what we've seen at Full Scale, and I think what I think I see from talking to other entrepreneurs and other people in the industry is right now AI is creating more work, right? Like you're going to all these startups that had however big team they had. I talked to a guy last week. He's like, well, now our customers expect us to add all this AI functionality. We gotta drop everything we're doing, forget our product roadmap, and go add all these sexy AI features that everybody thinks that we need. And so now we have all this more work to do, and we don't have enough people to do all the other stuff that was important because we're chasing this sexy AI stuff. And oh, by the way, our customers don't expect to pay us any more for it. And we don't know that they're actually going to use those AI features and that they actually solve any real problems. They just sound sexy. So we're building this AI stuff now.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed is that like there's specific problems that the AI tools are like really, really good at. Like if you have a specific function that you have clearly defined in your mind and you describe it, like I was working on something where I just needed a function that took a date and gave me an age. So just today minus that date and then format it the way I want it. Like
I think things like that are perfect examples.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing it just knocked it right out of the park. The question though becomes like, how much time did that save me? Like
15 minutes.
Yeah, I probably could have wrote that.
That's probably 5 minutes. I mean, that's an easy. Yeah. That's an easier one, right? I had a similar example where I needed to sort a list of words, but ignore the first character if it was like a quote.
Yeah,
because it was for Google keywords thing, and so I could have wrote a little sorting algorithm with a comparison operator and ignore the first character. Like maybe it'd take me an hour or two, and I would have figured it out, whatever, right? Or you ask ChatGPT and it gave it to me instantly, and then, of course it worked perfectly. But it was like those weird, simple little examples like that are perfect. Like it's really, really good at that. Those like weird little things. But how often do you do those weird little things? It's like, okay, it saved me 15 minutes a day to do that once a day. Yeah,
and it's pretty good at writing unit tests. Like if you give it a function like, hey, write a test for this, if you care about that. So I guess
here's my concern about AI. If AI was truly going to build software 100%, like there's no developer, I feel like the requirements would have to be extremely complicated, right? Like build this whole user interface. If a user clicks this thing and they didn't type in a first name, show an error. If they click this button, make sure this is filled out and this filled out. It has to be a valid email, blah, 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 blah. Those requirements would be very, very complicated, right? Like, and then if you want, you'd have to really build, depending on the type of code, all of the testing on the other side. You'd have to have all sorts of like very specific tests of like, okay, have these inputs, have to have this output.
Mhm.
So I'm not writing in code, I'm somehow writing it in English. I honestly feel like the level of complexity and detail required to write those requirements and write all the requirements for the testing might be more complicated than writing the code.
Well, I mean, I would say generally speaking, getting requirements and understanding a problem is like the hardest part of software in general, right?
It is.
Because how many times does, somebody request something and then you come back and you're like, well, okay, how many times a day is this going to happen? How fast does this need to be? What's the priority of this? And sometimes the person requesting it, they look at you like, oh, dude, just do the thing, right? Like you're going to have that same problem with an AI tool, but worse.
But here's the challenge, right? So in life, if I ask you to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you would figure it out, right? And that's the way most software developers get directions. They're like, hey, go make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you're lucky, they'll tell you to use grape or strawberry jelly and to cut it in half or not. Like that's about as most detail you're going to get. That is not going to work if you're talking to a computer.
Yeah.
If you're telling the AI to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you would never get it right because you would inevitably skip steps like open the jar, get a knife, put the knife in, put the peanut butter on the knife, smear it on the bread, right? Like all the detail that you would have to tell it to actually do it the right way, you would probably screw it up. Or the details are going to have to be very specific, or the AI is going to have to get way, way, way smarter. But the problem with software development is usually it's that like sort of detail is always missing. You're like, I don't know exactly what we need to do. I need you to help figure it out. I just know we need a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Can you go figure it out for me? Thanks.
Yeah. And there's all these little things that you kind of infer. Sometimes you're building it and you're like, okay, for now I'm gonna assume this, and then if that's not what they wanted, we'll open a new ticket for that, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good one. I'm curious, do you work on side projects that are like not entrepreneurial? Probably, I imagine you probably don't really have time for that.
These days I don't write any code on anything. The last company I had at Capacity was a SaaS company that built software for managing Google Ads, and I was writing some code for that. But and that really wasn't a side project. It was my main project. But no, I haven't really done any kind of side project stuff for quite a while.
Do you miss it?
I do. I mean, I think I like to write code. I like to solve problems. I like to be creative. I need that sort of outlet in my life, I feel like. And I think that's also, by the way, why a lot of software developers become really terrible managers, because their default state is that they're like, I'd rather be heads down writing code, not working on like planning and strategy and people management and process management and going to meetings. And even when I show up to the meeting, I'm going to write code and ignore everybody in the meeting, right? Like that is part of our problem, is like we're so like product or problem solving, like heads down kind of people. A lot of us are. That we suck at all the rest of it because we'd rather be like the dog on the bone trying to like solve the problem. And I think that's part of a personality problem. And so I struggle with that. So my part of my point is, if I'm in the mode of like trying to write code, it like kind of sort of consumes me. Like that's all I want to work on, and I would ignore everything else. That's my part of my problem.
Yeah,
I'm that guy.
I can see that. Yeah. Well, I mean, because that's like, for us, like that's the fun stuff, right? Like, especially when it's like, okay, we're starting a new project from scratch. You can use this cool new language, this cool new framework, all this fun stuff. Like, that's the stuff that gets excited.
But the most important thing as a manager is different, and that's the struggle. Like the most important thing as a manager is ensuring like, was that even the right thing that we were supposed to be working on?
Yeah.
But we don't want to work on that part of it. We don't want to go talk to all the stakeholders in the business, do the right planning, get the right requirements, make sure Collin's working on the right thing and doing the right thing. We'd rather just go write code somewhere.
Right. Well, it's like that story, and I think this has been debunked now. I don't think this is even true, but there was like that story that supposedly NASA was trying to invent a pen that worked in space. Have you heard this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the Soviets, NASA like spent all that money building the pen. that worked in space, but then the Soviets, they were just using pencils.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that's not even true, but the idea, is 100% happens, right? You build this awesome billion-dollar pen that works in space when what did we even spend all that money on? We have this other solution that gets the job done.
That's a big problem with software development in general, is a lot of development teams spend half of their time, most of their time working on maintenance, technical debt, projects like that. It would be cool if we rewrote it to do it this way, or some other developer left and I don't like how he wrote the code. I think his code sucks. I'm going to rewrite it. Like all this kind of stuff that doesn't necessarily deliver any real value.
Yeah. But I think that stuff is specifically dangerous when it comes to like rewrites and refactoring, because you can delude yourself into thinking it's valuable, because it kind of is. I mean, down the road, it can be worth it, right? If it's going to like save you time and development costs and stuff, but it's not actually changing anything in the product right now. So that there's that give and take.
I mean, there's two sides of it, right? I mean, obviously you have code eventually that gets old and it's using some weird old frameworks or weird old things or whatever. And it does need to be upgraded, right? Like it's a really old version of .NET, Ruby, Python, JavaScript, whatever it is that we've got to modernize. At some point in time, it gets old, right? But then the other side of it is like, it's modern code using the frameworks. I don't like how Collin wrote the code. I think we should rewrite it. But here's the reality. After you leave, the next guy is going to think the exact same thing about your code, because nobody likes anybody else's code because they don't understand it. Back to our conversation earlier, they just don't understand it. They don't understand the logic or whatever. Now, there is some code out there that is so bad that it is absolutely terrible and garbage. Like that does exist. But most of the time, it's just people just don't understand it.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little about the startup hustle and how that started.
Yeah, so me and a gentleman named Matt DeCourcy started the podcast. We were sharing offices together, and this was before Full Scale started, and I was still focused on StackFi. And podcast had become a little more popular at the time. This was like 2017 or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, podcasts had been around for a little while, but we decided something fun to do. We just started a podcast, and it was super low key, super simple. Just two dudes in an office, just sitting around one microphone talking. Not much different than this. And just was something fun to do. We just wanted to like real talk about entrepreneurship. Like it wasn't going to be like all rainbows and unicorns and pretend there was no problems with it. And it just started something fun to do.
Sorry. I think that's kind of what's cool about it is a lot of like startup content is very like, content farming. It's very like, I don't know, like a lot of entrepreneurial stuff is like, I mean, you see like the entrepreneur books and it's like you flip through it and you're like, this is just a bunch of crap. But like, I feel like you guys are talking about, hey, this is what it's like. This is what we're trying to do. Like, I think that's what's cool about it.
We tried to, when I interview people, try and get the real story of it. I mean, we've done 1,300 episodes now over the last 7 years or so. And I still do it. It's only once a week now. At one point in time, it used to be 4 or 5 times a week, but now it's just once a week. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. It's pretty popular, right? Like you guys are pretty successful.
We're in the top like 1, 2, 3% of podcasts. I mean, we get I think the last I checked, about 30,000 downloads a month, which is not a big number or anything, but most podcasts when they start out, I mean, get hundreds of downloads a month, and it feels like impossible to get thousands. And then it's podcasts don't get a lot of downloads. There takes a lot of work to, like everything in life, right? Like create a YouTube channel, you create a TikTok channel or whatever. Like you don't have just millions of followers show up. Like it's a long drawn out thing to grow an audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you say like 30,000 downloads isn't a lot, and I understand like it's not in like the scale of the internet. But if you think about like 30,000 downloads, would that be 30,000 different users?
Not necessarily.
But okay,
but even 30,000, but 30,000 gets you in the top like 2 or 3% of podcasts. Like, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, it's not millions. It's not, we're not competing with like Travis Kelce's, podcast or anything or whatever. But Joe Rogan or any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it puts you on the spectrum of top 2 or 3% or whatever.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking though, like, if 20,000 people are listening to your podcast a month, like 20,000 people is a lot of people, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you know, I'm in Blue Springs. There's 50,000 people here. It's the whole city, you know? So half the city basically is listening to your podcast a month. That's, you know, that's something to think about.
Well, and I think something we should talk about for a minute that I think is important. And one of my best advice to anyone about anything is being the best at what you do in life is not honestly that important. What's even more important is being the best known for what you do. Right.
Mhm.
And that's the struggle that I think a lot of people have is they want to be experts at what they do. They want to be the best at what they do. And that is all great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Like you should try and be the best at the best. But to truly be successful, you need to be the best known for what you do. Because if nobody knows you exist, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's like you can be the best. You can be the best plumber in Kansas City. But what plumber do you know? You know the one who runs the most radio ads, the most TV ads, and you see their trucks driving around. Like, you don't know if they're actually the best plumber, but they're the best known plumber. So when you go to call a plumber, who are you going to call?
Yeah.
The best known plumber, right? And to that point, like, that's why there's such a kind of focus and trend right now around like personal brand and thought leadership and influencer stuff and all that. And I highly recommend to everybody, like, you know, that's a great thing about LinkedIn and being able to have like your own kind of personal brand and thought leadership and stuff. And I talked to a guy yesterday who was looking for a job, felt bad for him. He was technical writer looking for a job. And I asked him, like, if he posted on LinkedIn about it, and he said no. And I'm like, what? He had 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. I'm like, dude, go post on LinkedIn that you're looking for a job. You got laid off, whatever. And he's like, well, companies don't want to hire people that are looking for a job desperately. They want to hire people that, you know, have a job. And like, he had all these reasons. He had all these reasons to talk himself out of it. I'm like, dude, just go post it. You don't know, like some guy you knew from 5 years ago might see this. Like, oh yeah, I talked to somebody yesterday who mentioned at lunch they needed a technical writer, and boom, there you go. You found a job. Like, best known. Like, you've got to tell people, you got to get out there. Like, it's best known beats best every time.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one. I'm going to clip that and clip that. Okay. This question is just for me. Okay. I remember when it happened on LinkedIn, somebody was telling me, was it a Ferrari you bought?
Okay.
Is that right?
I own a Ferrari. Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to know, what's it like to buy one and what's it like to own one?
You know, I think most things in life, and this is very much a human problem, we always want like what we don't have, right? You're like, I want a pool table, or I want a hot tub, or I want a Ferrari, or whatever the thing is. Pick the thing, whatever the thing is. You want it, but then once you have it and you've had it for a few months or whatever, you don't care about it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, anybody listening to this right now who's like, oh yeah, I bought a pool table, or I bought a hot tub, or whatever the thing is, a few months go by, a year goes by, like, you don't care anymore. Like, there's something about humans that we always want something to look forward to, and we always want like this thing, and then once we have it, it doesn't matter. And you know, I had a lot of success at an early age. At 29, sold a company, had a big exit, could buy whatever I wanted. I think I've owned 4 Ferraris over the last so many years, or whatever, 4 different ones. It's just a car to me.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a totally different driving experience than other cars. Like, I own a Tesla, and I always ask people, I'm like, which car is faster, the Tesla or the Ferrari? And they always say the Ferrari, but they're never right. The Tesla was actually faster.
Right.
But the Tesla is boring. It's like soulless, boring car. The Ferrari has like a heart and a soul, and it's like driving a musical instrument. It's just a different experience. But I think to part of your point, like, we always want like all these things in life. We're always motivated by them, and then when we get them, they don't really matter. And after owning a Ferrari for all these years, to me, it's just a car. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a car to me.
So I mean, if you get bored of it, I mean, I guess I could take it off your hands, you know, if you just, you know. But
I went through a little bit of a midlife crisis, I would say, last year, and I bought the one I have now because I had gotten a divorce before, and I sold the one I had before when I was going through the divorce, and then Last year, I think I went through a little bit of a midlife crisis. Like, you know what? I kind of miss having it. The kids loved it. I take the kids to
Yeah.
school in it, and all
Oh
this kind of
yeah.
like I drive it. It doesn't just
Yeah.
sit in my garage. So
Yeah, that's cool. But what's it like to buy? Like, do you reach out to like a representative or so? Like, how do you buy a Ferrari?
okay, so that's kind of a funny story, actually. So to buy a used one, anybody can buy a used one. You can call
Right.
dealerships around the country. You can find them. To order one new is actually interesting, and I've ordered 2 of them brand new. Manufactured in Italy, shipped over here new off the assembly line. You can't order one. There is no way to order one. You have to call the dealership, and the dealership gets allotments. The dealerships don't even know. So every month, like Ferrari calls them and says, "Hey, you can have 2 of this kind of car and 1 of this kind of car and whatever. Figure out who wants to buy them."
Okay.
And so the dealerships have like a list. So if you call, you like get put on a list. But the problem is, they can decide who they want to sell the cars to, and they have no problem selling the car.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
there are more buyers than there is inventory. And so if you want to buy like some special edition thing or whatever
Yeah.
it's impossible to buy unless you have built up this great relationship with that dealership and the owner of the dealership. You will never have a chance. I had a guy down the street, actually was a guy named Scott Tucker, who famously went to prison. There's a Netflix special about him, his payday loan company or whatever, on Netflix. In Kansas City here was the like grandmaster of payday loans.
I'll have
And
to look that up.
but anyways, he collected Ferraris, so he had like all of them. And somebody like him, they had the relationship with the dealers and
Right.
bought
Yeah.
them or whatever. But yeah,
Because I've heard that, like I've heard, like Ralph Lauren has like he has like every car ever made, like the biggest car collection in the world or whatever. So I assume like Ferrari they get one of those things where they make like 100 of these and they probably just call him up and he's like, yeah,
that's
sure, whatever.
I mean that's the challenge, right? Is let's say there's 100 Ferrari dealers in the world, each of them might have one of those. And
Right.
so each of those dealers has to figure out who they want to sell it to, because they might have 10 Ralph Laurens that want to buy it.
Yeah. But I mean, I was curious because I know Ferrari, like they're really big on like creating the brand and like, I imagine that's at least partially intentional, right? That it's
It
everyone's
is.
clamoring to get one.
Yeah, that's like an entrepreneurial lesson there about like supply and demand. Like they artificially keep the supply low to keep the demand high.
Yeah. So we always wrap up our episodes with we do this little segment with like whose side are you on, where we pick like one of those things that developers argue about endlessly and we just kind of give
Okay.
our take on it.
Tab.
So I've got a few because I mean tabs. You do tabs?
I'm going tabs.
That's the type of thing, right? Like, so I mean, we've got like Vim versus Emacs, or
Neither.
are you like you're a Visual Studio guy, or?
Yeah, I'm an old .NET developer. So
Right. Well, so what did you have like on your Commodore 64 for editing?
well, when I was doing software development related stuff, it was actually on a regular PC and dial. I don't know. Well, actually, there's probably different things, but they were all some sort of basic text editor that you've never heard of before. They were like a terminal, different kind of dial-up terminal software, like totally different thing.
Okay.
They weren't code editors.
Right. Yeah. What about desktop OSs?
I'm a Windows guy. I hate Apple.
Yeah.
I think Apple's like the devil.
Yeah. So you're an Android guy too, I'm assuming?
Yep. Yeah, if you're an Apple guy, like I don't like the the App Store and taking all the money from Epic Games and like all of that, like I'm out. Like they're all evil.
All right, so how about dark theme versus light theme?
Dark
on everything?
Dark. Going dark.
What if there's like a window behind you? You don't ever feel like it gets like well, actually, I feel like honestly that's probably more of just an Apple problem because they make their screen so shiny that it's like you're just looking at your reflection if there's a window behind you. Yeah.
I don't have too many problems with that.
Well then I think that's all I got for you. We're about where we were targeting. Do you want to? Do you have anything you want to add, or you want to shout out your stuff?
Yeah, sure. If you guys want to, if you guys want to follow me for more, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn almost every day. I have 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. You can also check out the Startup Hustle podcast, and I have a newsletter at startuphustlenews.com. If you happen to be wanting to hire software developers, you can check us out at Full Scale. That's what we do. I have about 300 employees in the Philippines, do software development for other people. So
I have worked with Full Scale directly before at a previous job.
Oh, really?
They're
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Very
is
good.
it all It's just a random thing. Is it all Philippines, or do you have people all over the world?
It's all Philippines. Yeah. Yeah, we've had really good luck there. There's great talent there, and yeah, we like it.
Yeah, no, I had a really good experience. Well, then I think that's going to wrap it up, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right. Thank you, guys.
1x Developer Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Collin. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the 1x Developer Podcast, and let you know that if you have any questions, comments, or if you just want to tell us about your day, you can reach us at X, formerly known as Twitter, at 1x Developer Podcast. We're also on YouTube at 1x Developer Podcast. You can email us if you're weird at 1xdeveloperpodcast at protonmail.com. And lastly, don't forget to follow, subscribe, all that stuff, so you don't miss any further episodes of the 1x Developer Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.